So yes, this is Transformed Non-Conformist, written in 1954. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 1:2. We are a colony of heaven. Philippians 3:20. We must not be astronomically intimidated. And also, just as an aside, I realized that, I can find audio recordings of many of these. My hesitation in that is a lot of times when people listen to Martin Luther King speak, I think there's a tendency to just get transfixed by his delivery. And I really want to analyze the language itself. So I'm going to be taking my time a bit with this. Sorry. Anyway. Both of these passages suggest that every true Christian is a citizen of two worlds, the world of time and the world of eternity. The Christian finds himself in the paradoxical situation of having to be in the world, yet not of the world. Indeed, this is what is meant by one of the passages just read, in which Christians are referenced as a colony of heaven. This figure of speech should have special relevance for us in America, since the early days of our nation's history were days of colonialism. 13 of the states of our union were originally British colonies. Although our forefathers had relative freedom in forming their institutions and systems of law, their ultimate allegiance was to the King of England. And so, although the Christian finds himself in the colony of time, his ultimate allegiance is to the empire of eternity. In other words, the Christian owes his ultimate allegiance to God, and if any earthly institution conflicts with God's will, it is the Christian duty to revolt against it. So that's drawing an interesting parallel. Wherein the foundation, the rejection of injustice through struggle was part of America's history, but is also he's suggesting here, is a moral duty. And this kind of language, I think, is going to be, in looking at it, while he is widely celebrated as someone who advocated for peaceful protest, there are a lot of passages in King's writing which suggests that if there is ongoing injustice and cries are not heard, there is a moral duty to take higher action, whatever that may look like. Let's see. Now, there can be no doubt that the command of our text, do not conform, is difficult advice for any modern person. The pressure of the herd is ever strong upon us. Even our intellectual disciplines attempt to convince us on the necessity of conforming. Some of our philosophical sociologists have gone so far as to tell us that morality is merely group consensus. Hey, Andrew. In sociological lingo, this means that there is little difference between mores and morals. In plain language, it means that you tell the difference between right and wrong by a sort of Gallup poll method of finding what the majority thinks. The answer of certain psychologists to all maladjusted people is simply to learn to conform to this world. If we only dress and act and think like other people, then we shall be happy and mentally healthy. This, yeah. There is an interesting thing here, and this is very much reinforced in a lot of ways. There's like we see this struggle with like the questioning now of cisnormativity and the rejection of that by conservative groups. We see that in the questioning of and challenge of white dominance in not only in power structures, but also in behaviors and modes of speaking and ways that we look. This is very much speaking to the foundation of what privilege is, because if you do happen to slot into what the majority values, white, male, cisnormative, heterosexual, then you are you have a stronger foundation to be happy and mentally healthy, but therein lies kind of a foundational injustice in that kind of mode of thinking, because for everyone outside of that group, there's less opportunity to be that, you know, to have all that you the world does not cater to anyone outside of that conformity. Let's see. At the command of our texts, geez, I can't word, still stand before us with glaring urgency. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. As Christians, we are a colony of heaven, thrown out as pioneers into the midst of an unchristian world to represent our ideals and way of living, the ideals and way of living of a nobler realm, until the earth should be the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. I'm sure that many of you have had the experience of dealing with thermometers and thermostats. The thermometer merely records the temperature. If it is 70 or 80 degrees, it registers that, and that is all. On the other hand, the thermostat changes the temperature. If it's too cool in the house, you simply push the thermostat up a little and it makes it warmer. And so the Christian is called upon not to be like the thermometer, conforming to the temperature of his society, but he must be like the thermostat, serving to transform the temperature of his society. This is a great analogy, one that I've seen deployed in other contexts as well, but this is very good context for this. In spite of this imperative demand to live differently, we are producing a generation of the mass mind. We have moved from the extreme of rugged individualism to the even greater extreme of rugged collectivism. Instead of making history, we are made by history. A grant given. The philosopher Nietzsche once said that every man is a hammer or an anvil. That is to say, every man either molds society or is molded by society. Who can doubt that most men today are anvils, continually being molded by the patterns of the majority? Yeah. What's interesting here to me is inadvertently a lot of this language has actually been co-opted by by conservatives who often make the case that, oh, the mob is trying to cancel us or whatever, and we won't conform. But like what they're doing is conforming to the standard that they grew up in the past. Like they are inherently conformative. That is the basis of conservative ideation, is conformity. They simply don't like that conformity being challenged. They don't like the hammer. Yeah, they lost the plot, absolutely. But, like, despite a lot of the backlash, this is still an extremely patriarchal, cis-normative, white-centered country. And that does warrant challenging and changing. It just... I wish that the movement to change society were as big as conservatives said it was. Hopefully it will be soon. Let's see. Along with this has grown a deep worship of bigness. Especially in this country, many people are impressed by nothing that is not big. Big cities, big churches, big corporations. We are tempted to worship size. We live in an age of jumboism, whose men find security in that which is large in number and extensive in size. Men are afraid to stand alone for their convictions. I'm skipping past some of this because it's notes on. Men are afraid to stand alone for their convictions. There are those who have high and noble ideas, but they never reveal them because they're afraid of being non-conformist. I have seen many white people who sincerely oppose segregation and discrimination, but they never took a rea against it because of fear of standing alone. I have seen many young people and older people alike develop undesirable habits, not because they wanted to do it in the beginning, not even because they've enjoyed it, but because they were ashamed of saying no when the rest of the group was saying yes. Even the Christian church has often been afraid to stand up for what is right because the majority didn't sanction it. The church has too often been an institution serving to crystallize and conserve the patterns of the crowd. This feels like it's speaking so much to white evangelicalism right here. The mere fact that slavery, segregation, war, and economic exploitation have been sanctioned by the church is a fit testimony to the fact that the church has too often conformed the authority of the world rather than conforming to the authority of God. Even we preachers have manifested our fear of being non-conformist. So many of us turn into showmen and even clowns, distorting the real meaning of the gospel in an attempt to conform to the crowd. How many ministers of Jesus Christ have sacrificed their precious ideals and cherished convictions on the altar of the crowd? Oh, how many people today are caught up in the shackles of the crowd? Pausing here for a moment. So yeah, what he's speaking to here, like, in the time, of course, is challenging things like segregation and things of that nature, and like, you know, the crushing of people under capitalism just to get people rich, and all of these various things that he goes on about later, all of these things that are actually like central in Christian teaching, looking out for your neighbor and making sure nobody's hungry, making sure people are clothed, all of these tenets, core tenets of Christianity that are abandoned because the majority consensus is, at the time was segregation is good, and also capitalism is good, and business is good. It's interesting, depressing in many ways, is how much the white evangelical church has gone even deeper down that path of crystallizing the injustices of capital, the corruption of all of these things, and even in many cases of bigotry, perpetuating that as just what is normal because those people don't conform to us, our tribe, and honor thy father and mother, rather than viewing things as everyone is in God's community and should be loved and embraced as such. For context and full admission, I'm an atheist, but I was raised Christian. So I've studied the Bible and can speak to this. I'm not, but I wanted to make that admission up front. But yeah. But I like this is really important. Also, prosperity gospel folks and such, like, that would 100% be condemned through this speech. Yeah, imagine reading the Bible. I know. Let's see. I know. A lot of folks. Many of us think we can find a sort of security in conforming to the ideas of the mob. But my friends, it is the non-conformists that have made history, not those who always look to see which way the majority is going before they make a decision, not those who are afraid to say no when everybody else is saying yes. But history has been made by those who could stand up before a crowd and not bow. The great creative insights have come from men who were in a minority. It was the minority that fought for religious liberty. It was the minority that brought about the freedom of scientific research. In any cause that concerns the progress of mankind, put your faith in the non-conformist. Yes, princess. Now let us make it clear that nonconformity in itself might not be good. There is a type of bad nonconformity. There's no virtue in being a nonconformist just to be a nonconformist. Some people are nonconformists just to get attention and to be different. So Paul gives a formula for constructive nonconformity, which is found in the second half of the text. In order to discern the true will of God and become constructive nonconformist, we must accept a new mental outlook. We must be transformed. Jesus' phrase for this experience was the new birth. And so only when we have been born again can we be true nonconformist. We are called upon to be transformed nonconformist. This is our eternal challenge as Christians. Courage of three Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is still a challenge to us today. The king Nebuchadnezzar had ordered that all were to bow down and worship the golden image. But there stood in the midst 3 Hebrew boys who were determined not to bow down and serve the golden image. And they said to the king, "If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. But if not, we will not bow." Who today can stand up and refuse to bow in a crowd where everybody else is bowing? So, in the first half was largely just laying out the case. This is kind of a sermon formula. So it's building the case, describing the idea, and then reinforcing the idea through one of the parables in Scripture. This is a good one to pick. It was a very visual sort of parable. The 3 who refused to bow in front of the golden idol. And we get more scripture reinforcing the same message here. The spiritual strength and moral courage of Jesus amid the temptation in the wilderness is our eternal challenge. Jesus was born at a time when the majority of people thought of the kingdom as a political kingdom, and thought of the Messiah as the one who would restore this political kingdom with all of his power and pomp and riches. And all of the temptations that Satan offered Christ were temptations to fall in line with this type of material political kingdom. In other words, he was urging Christ to conform to the wishes of the mob. But in the midst of such a plea, we can hear Christ saying in no uncertain terms, "Get thee behind me, Satan," as if to say, "I will not bow, for I have orders from an authority not of this world to build a new kind of kingdom, a kingdom that will one day rock the world, a kingdom that will shake the hinges from the gates of the Roman Empire. It will not be a kingdom political structure and materialistic in outlook. It will be a kingdom of the Spirit." I realize that at this time, this type of kingdom does not conform to the majority opinion, but I will not bow. This again is a really interesting line and interpretation, especially because of this renewed idea of trying to build America as basically like a Christian kingdom by those on the right. Because he's basically highlighting that even at that time, there was a confusion about what Jesus was talking about not trying to build a political government around Christendom. That was never in the cards. But that message continues to be lost today. Who will take the attitude of Jesus and be a sincere nonconformist? Today we stand on the brink of moral and physical destruction, and the great need of the hour is sincere nonconformist men. Nonconformist men who will stand amid a world of materialism and treat all men as brothers. Men who will stand up in a world that attempts to solve its problems by war and declare that he who lives by the sword will die by the sword. Who this afternoon will go away with the determination not to be a slave to the crowd and not to bow to the desires of the mob. Remember, Christian friends, we are now in the colony of time, but our ultimate allegiance is to the empire of eternity. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Conformity is costly, I must admit this, and with John Oxman, which is a poem, yeah. Yes, this is very interesting. It mentions here in an outline of the sermon, King continues he's apparently explicitly calling out materialism, nationalism, and militarism in this outline. And that comes across very clearly, I think. So that was the transformed non-conformist. So, sorry, let me turn over just a moment. So in today's terms, this is something that is extremely relevant because we do still see many, many people, especially liberal people, who pay tepid lip service to opposing, racism or sexism or various forms of bigotry or all of these things. But they express them, their friends, they express them in private. And what is being called for here is to go deeper into the paint with your convictions. If that is where your heart is, wear it on your sleeve, make noise about it, actually incorporate it into your life. One of the things that we've talked about several times on here is the toxicity of the attitude of keeping the peace by refusing to talk about politics with your friends or family or, around the kitchen table or what have you. Because you don't want to upset them, right? But in holding your tongue, in maintaining your silence, you are being a conformist. You're not being the transformed nonconformist that King is calling on. If everybody who said in private that they rejected bigotry acted on it, you'd see a revolutionary change in society. So, yeah, I think that was written in 1954, still extremely relevant today because things haven't changed nearly enough. All right. Like it was written this week, I know.